discussing yesterday the reign of Manasseh, the 55-year reign of Manasseh, and how that devastated Am Yisrael. Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichus Damim. He became king at 12. He reigned for 55 years, so he died at 77. And we looked at the discrepancy between the book of Malachim, that describes him as a Rasha from the beginning to the end, and the book of Divrei Hayamim that describes Manasseh as doing tshuva. And the teretz, you'll remember, was that there are two aspects to Manasseh's sins. There is the sins that he committed, and then there is the influence that he spread in Klal Yisrael to be machti es harabim, to cause many to sin. And even though he did tshuva on his personal chesrenas, he was not able to undo the damage in terms of the people. Memela mitzad Manasseh as a yochid, he's a Baal Tshuva. Mitzad Manasseh as a machti es harabim, he died as a Rasha. And that's why there is a machlokas in the Gemara. In fact, whether Manasseh has a chelik in Olam Haba or not, some Tanoim say he has no chelik in Olam Haba, because he was machti es harabim, and the damage that he did is irreversible, at least at that point. Others say that he himself did tshuva, so mamela, for that he'll be zocha to olam haba. So that's the discrepancy, simply because lemaisa he did tshuva, but the tshuva did not undo the effect. You know, it reminds me a little bit, although it's a totally different context, of a famous story with the Chafetz Chaim. Somebody went to the Chafetz Chaim, who of course always spoke about not speaking Lashon Hara, and he said, I've spoken Lashon Hara about people, I want to do tshuva. How do I do tshuva for Lashon Hara? So the Chafetz Chaim said, I have a perfect way to do tshuva for Lashon Hara. He says, take a pillow that's stuffed with feathers. They used to stuff pillows with feathers. And the man is really excited. He thinks maybe there's a segula here, like a magic thing. He says, and go up on the roof with the stuffed pillow. He says, yes, Baruch Hashem, what's going on? He says, and shake the pillow, shake it, till all the feathers scatter. So the guy's getting really excited, like he has this magic wand that's going to take away his sin. And then the Chafetz Chaim says, there's one more step I forgot to tell you. Now gather up all the feathers that have been dispersed, and then you'll have tshuva for Lashon Hara. What's the message? The message is, I'm sorry I spoke Lashon Hara, I regret it, I have remorse. But the damage is done. How do you undo the damage? Now, that was pre-internet days, right? That was a long time ago. Today, can you imagine, worldwide spread of Lashon Hara? Millions of people can read about things. There have been suicides. People have taken their lives because information about them was simply publicized. So when Chazal say, one who speaks Lashon Hara is ke'ilu shofech damim, it's as if you're a murderer. Bizman hazeh, that can mamish be literal, 100% literal. People have taken their lives. Usually they've been outed as gay or whatever it is. So one has to be very, very careful. Not everything can be undone. I do tshuva, and that's a wonderful thing, and God forgives me in some sense, but the damage that was done is the damage that was done, and for that there still would have to be a din b'cheshbon. Okay. Be it as it may, Manasseh dies, and Manasseh has a son whose name is Amon, and Amon only rules for 2 years. Amon has a very short reign. There is virtually nothing that the Navi, either in Malachim or Divrei Hayamim, tells me about Amon, except the very disheartening idea that he followed in the evil ways of his father Manasseh, which means even though Manasseh did tshuva, Amon apparently didn't get the memo, didn't take the message. Amon did not do tshuva. Amon died as a Rasha after only 2 years, and he died through assassination. He was assassinated by his own servants, which is unusual. Again, when we do Malachim in more detail, we'll go over some of this. When you look at the Malchei Yisrael of the northern kingdom, there's a lot of assassinations. People are killing each other all the time. The Malchei Yehuda tend not to have that many assassinations. It's usually son after son after son. Even the kings that were not righteous, they just tend to follow one another. But Amon was a rare situation where he quite literally was assassinated after only 2 years, and he was replaced by his own son, Yoshiyahu HaMelech. Yoshiyahu HaMelech is a very, very, very important king. Yoshiyahu became king at the young age of 8. So Manasseh, his grandfather, became king at 12. Yoshiyahu became king at 8, and he ruled 31 years, but that does mean he died a young man. 8 years old, 31 years, he died at 39. What is so significant about Yoshiyahu? Yoshiyahu has a number of very important events. Yoshiyahu, for various reasons that are kind of mysterious, was a righteous person, even as a child. He was righteous. Yoshiyahu was a tzaddik. Yoshiyahu rejected the ways of his father and the ways of his grandfather, Manasseh. He went back to the ways of Chizkiyahu that he never knew. Yoshiyahu did not, Yoshiyahu was, if you make the calculation, at best was a very, very small baby when Chizkiyahu died, and perhaps he was born after Chizkiyahu died. So he didn't know his grandfather in any way, but somehow he went back to the derech of his grandfather. Part of why that may have been so is that his teacher is identified. He was under the influence of Chilkiyahu HaKohen. Chilkiyahu, who was the Kohen Gadol. Chilkiyahu HaKohen. Now, do we come across the name Chilkiyahu anywhere else? Well, it's interesting. The prophet Yirmiyahu, one of the great prophets, his full name is Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu. So it's very logical, and Chazal make this assumption, although it's possible for more than one person to have the name, that Chilkiyahu HaKohen, who was the great, great influence on Yoshiyahu HaMelech, was none other than the father of the Navi Yirmiyahu. Let me remind you as well that the Gemara in Megillah says, Chazal have a Messiah, that whenever a prophet is identified with his father's name as well, Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu, then the father is also a prophet, even if prophecies are not recorded. So many Nevi'im, like Amos or different Nevi'im, we only are given their first name. We're not given, in fact, Eliyahu HaNavi, right? Eliyahu HaNavi. We don't know who Eliyahu's father was. So Chazal say, when you're given the name of a Navi without his father, that means his father may have been a tzaddik, but his father was not a Navi. When you're given the name of a Navi with the father's name, that means the father is also a Navi, even though there's no prophecy that's directly recorded. So based on that, we would have to conclude that Chilkiyahu HaKohen was not only the Kohen Gadol, we know Yirmiyahu was a Kohen, that we know as well, but Chilkiyahu HaKohen was also a Navi, since the book of Yirmiyahu describes Yirmiyahu as Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu. So Yoshiyahu was a young boy, so obviously he was still impressionable, Baruch Hashem, and Chilkiyahu HaKohen was mashpia on Yoshiyahu to become a very, very righteous person. Now, we don't know the ins and outs of palace intrigue. I mean, just have to think about what's going on here. Amon was assassinated by his servants. No particular reason is given, but apparently there are people who kind of wanted him out of the way. Well, is Yoshiyahu's life at risk? We don't really know. And given the fact that Amon was surrounded by evil counselors, then certainly some of the people that are hanging around the palace are not righteous people. So how does Chilkiyahu manage to navigate things that Yoshiyahu is exposed to the good influences and not the bad influences is very, very interesting. Meaning once you start thinking about these stories, there's actually a lot of detail that we don't have that maybe you'd like to have, because essentially this would be a case history in how do you protect a young child from very bad negative influences within the family. That's exactly what's going on. But Chilkiyahu HaKohen was the main person who protected Yoshiyahu from the bad influences, and he became a very righteous person. Now, the first 10 years of his reign, we're not really told that much, meaning from 8 to 18, it just mentions the righteous, etc. But then the narrative begins to tell us something he did when he was 18 years old, 10 years later. So it kind of skips a lot of the years. And it mentions that he decided to do a renovation of the Beis HaMikdash. Because remember, during the reigns of Manasseh and during the reign of Amon, and apparently even the first 10 years of Yoshiyahu, which he didn't get around to this, the Beis HaMikdash was functioning. Well, under Manasseh's reign, it was literally padlocked. It was locked up. I assume that with Yoshiyahu, they were doing the avoda, but it was in a very great state of disrepair, a state of neglect, because Manasseh had ignored it, Amon had ignored it. So Yoshiyahu wanted to do what's called Bedek Habayis. He wanted to do repairs. He wanted to beautify the Beis HaMikdash. We don't always realize that had to be done. You know, we think the Beis HaMikdash is built and it just lasts 400 years, 410 years, 420 years. The Beis HaMikdash had to be repaired as well. There would be broken pipes and walls needed repairs. I mean, there were repairs. In fact, when a person makes things hektish, so sometimes you're makdish things for korbanos, and sometimes you're makdish things like money, lebedek habayis. What does the word bedek habayis meaning? Repair the cracks in the walls. Right? So there were maintenance jobs that had to be done in the Beis HaMikdash. And Yoshiyahu, in order to honor Hashem, wanted to engage in a massive construction project, not building new things, but kind of repair and upgrade and beautify and the like. So people are digging around. Right? And now again, halachas, you have to be careful here. We're not given all the details. Halachically, there are areas that only Kohanim are allowed to go and not Yisraelim. And if you're Tameh, you're not allowed to go. So obviously the different halachas had to be kept in terms of where people went. But there are workers, and there are workers working in Shiputzim to repair the Beis HaMikdash. And they discover something. They discover, buried in the ground, a Sefer Torah. And this is a very exciting, I'm going to discuss why it's exciting, but this is treated as a very exciting, unique, special event, a message from God. And Hilkiyahu HaKohen brings the Sefer Torah to Yoshiyahu, and he reads to him the Sefer Torah. And Yoshiyahu starts sobbing. Now, again, it's a little mysterious. They found a Sefer Torah. So what? So there are two different ways of learning. One of the ways that some learn, which will really be philosophically very difficult, is that the rishus of Manasseh over 55 years had been so great that he literally eradicated all the Sifrei Torah in existence. In the world, in Eretz Yisrael, there were no Sifrei Torah. There were no Sifrei Torah. Now, this seems to be a little difficult, meaning what is so exciting is that they're aware of the Torah, they're aware there's such a thing as the Torah, they didn't have it. That's how far Manasseh went. And Baruch Hashem, they found a Sefer Torah in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, this is a little difficult for a lot of reasons. First of all, even if we understand the extreme position, which is pretty extreme, that Manasseh managed to destroy all the Sifrei Torah, 100%, maybe not 100%, who knows? But Manasseh did tshuva. At least as an individual, Manasseh did tshuva. If Manasseh did tshuva, why weren't, and that was for a number of years, why weren't more Sifrei Torah written? Now, of course, maybe you'll argue, well, the problem is, if you don't have another Sefer Torah, how are you going to write a new one? Is that what's going on? Meaning to say, they know there's such a thing called the Sefer Torah. They don't have the text. It's a little difficult. And then, of course, you have 10 years of Yoshiyahu being righteous, and there's no Sefer Torah. Philosophically, there's another problem with finding the Sefer Torah, and that is the following. This is, in fact, the story of Yoshiyahu and this finding of the Torah is sometimes stated as a kasha on the well-known Kuzari principle that Rabbi Gottlieb talks about quite a lot. The Kuzari principle, as it's called, is Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's argument as to the proof of the divine origin of the Torah, right? How do we know the Torah comes from God? Maybe it was made up, right? That's his issue. So his argument is, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi makes the argument that the communication of God that Judaism claims occurred is very different than the communication of other religions. And that is, in other religions, like Christianity, God allegedly speaks to one person or a small number of people, and that one person or that small number of people then convinces people that God gave me messages, and if you're charismatic enough, articulate enough, convincing enough, you can persuade people that God spoke to you, and eventually you might have thousands or millions of followers. But the problem is that the guy might be lying, meaning I could easily make up the idea that God spoke to me. How are you going to prove that he didn't? And therefore, religions that base their credibility on revelation from a single or a small number of people are not credible in the sense that they can't really prove their claim. Now, Judaism makes the claim that God did not speak only to Moshe, and Moshe comes back and says, God spoke to me, but God spoke to 3 million people. That's our claim. 600,000 men who left Mitzrayim from 20 up, and if you count the women and the children, and with the Erev Rav, it would even be much, 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 much larger. God spoke to millions of people. Now, the question becomes the following. You can say, well, how do I know that's true? Just because you say God spoke to millions of people, who says that's true? Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's argument is, how do you introduce a lie like that into the system? Moshe says the next day to 3 million people, remember that God spoke to you. Well, I might say to myself, I don't remember that, and I nudge my neighbor. Did God speak to us yesterday? Not that I know of. Meaning to say, you can't introduce that lie into the system because everybody knows that it's false. So if the story gets accepted, Rav Yehuda Halevi says, that's evidence that it must be true. In other words, the point basically is that any religion that is based on a select revelation, now maybe it's true. That's not a proof that it's false, but the point is, if it is based on a revelation to one person, there is no necessary credibility that the story is true. When it is predicated on mass revelation, there is no way to introduce falsification into this system. Now, this is called the Kuzari principle because it's based on Rav Yehuda Halevi and the Kuzari. Now, again, I myself am not going to tell you it is an ironclad logical principle. There are a lot of arguments that can be made against it. Some people have shown other cultures have also claims of mass revelation for crazy things. There is also hypnosis. There's also hysteria. Rabbi Gottlieb, this is one of the things he has spent hours and hours, years and years and years going over this principle. So I'll refer you to his shiurim, his books, his lectures. Kuzari principle is one of the things I don't want to say he's obsessed with, but it's very, very near and dear to his heart. So ask him whatever questions you have on it. But the point I want to make is this. Some have made the following arguments. If the Torah was truly forgotten in the days of Manasseh, and it was rediscovered in the days of Yoshiyahu, then indeed we don't have this unbroken tradition of 3 million people. We have one guy, Yoshiyahu HaKohen. There were a few people. A few people found this Torah that said, oh yeah, God gave us all of these commandments. Which means the tradition of Sinai no longer comes down from many, many people. It comes down from one person or a few people. Yeah.
Couldn't Yoshiyahu have said when he found the Torah, said, like previously, God spoke to 3 million people without that actually happening? Couldn't they just make up a claim that Hashem spoke to 3 million people?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's why the finding of the Torah is a problem, because the whole veracity of revelation is being established by 1 or 2 people. But the answer to that might be that even if the physical Sefer Torah were eradicated, the traditions and even the mitzvahs, in other words, if Yoshiyahu was righteous, the assumption is he was keeping the Torah. How could he keep the Torah if there's no Sefer Torah? The answer is the written Torah became the oral Torah, meaning it became part of the oral Torah. So as a result, the tradition, meaning it's not that people forgot there was a Jewish people, people forgot there was an Exodus, people forgot there was Sinai. They remembered everything, but they didn't have the written record. So as a result, when they found the Torah, they recognized this is what we've been following. So it's not that Judaism was forgotten. If Judaism was forgotten and it came back because 2 people found something, we would undermine the whole Kuzari principle, that revelation is predicated on the mass acceptance of things. But I think we would understand that even if you take the radical position that the Sefer Torahs were lost, the Masorah was not lost. And that's why Yoshiyahu HaKohen was a tzaddik. That is why Yoshiyahu was a tzaddik. That's why Chizkiyahu did tshuva. But still, it's still a pretty extreme statement to say that this was so amazing. They didn't have a Sefer Torah for all of those years. But this is pshat number 1. And indeed, if you read the Nach, just literally, just read the verses, that is the impression you'll get. I mean, imagine this. There was no Sefer Torah. Quite amazing. This, however, is not the way Chazal understand it. Chazal understand the narrative in a totally different way. Yeah.
Well, doesn't Yoshiyahu say, after they read in the Sefer Torah, he's crying, he says, you haven't been keeping this Torah, right? So it appears then that he hasn't been, they didn't know that not only did they not have a Torah, but it seems like they weren't following it. So
Well, they weren't, they certainly were not following it because many were, they were Rishayim from Manasseh.
but I mean to suggest perhaps that there wasn't a Torah Shabbat Peh involved.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about that because thank you. All right. Yeah, we'll talk about this. Let me give you Chazal's understanding of what's going on. Chazal understand this story in less of an extreme manner. Chazal understand, yeah, of course there were Sefer Torah. The fact that we find the Sefer Torah when we're digging under the Mikdash was not per se unusual. There were Sefer Torah, and people knew the Torah, they knew the mitzvahs. Many were not keeping them, to be sure, but the Torah was known, like today. Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, whatever it is. People were had the mitzvahs and the like. So what was unique about this event was not, this is Chazal's pshat, was not that they found the Torah, but that the Torah was open to a particular place. Meaning they didn't find a rolled up Torah. They found a Torah that was open to certain psukim. And these are the psukim of the Tochacha, the psukim that say, if you don't keep Hashem's mitzvahs, there will be a chorban, there will be a galus. Now here, both Chilkiyahu and Yoshiyahu saw this. First of all, it's kind of miraculous that you find a Torah that's open to exactly those verses. And he realized that this was a special warning from Hashem, that unless Klal Yisrael, Yoshiyahu was righteous, But unless Klal Yisrael does tshuva. Now, I had mentioned yesterday that Hashem was actually gozer in the reign of Manasseh, that there would be a churban. And even though Manasseh did tshuva, he apparently didn't have the koach to undo the chatoim that he rooted in Klal Yisrael. And Amon, of course, was a Russia anyway. But Yoshiyahu is given the chance. He sees this as a message from Hashem, that he has the chance to turn things around. And that is why there was crying and sobbing. And then the pasuk goes on and says, Yoshiyahu instituted what you would call a mass tshuva campaign. He sent people all over Eretz Yisrael. Of course, the 10 tribes are exiled, so we're talking about Malchus Yehuda really, but all over Malchus Yehuda, which was not a very large kingdom, but Malchus Yehuda, to uproot the Avodah Zarah. There was still a lot of Avodah Zarah. To uproot the Asherah trees, to destroy the altars for idolatry, to destroy the bamos. Now, bamos is a different problem. Bamos are private altars even to Hashem, that people would bring their own korbanos, which even though it's not Avodah Zarah, it's to Hashem, but it's Asher D'Oraisa to bring korbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So Yoshiyahu is trying to bring the people to tshuva, and it mentions people did tshuva, and then it describes similar, there are two great Korban Pesach ceremonies that are described in the book of Malachim. One is Chizkiyahu's Korban Pesach, and one is Yoshiyahu's Korban Pesach. Chizkiyahu's Korban Pesach, you'll recall, had a little bit of a halachic irregularity because he made it a leap year when he shouldn't have made it a leap year. Yoshiyahu was 100%. It was an expression. I assumed there was a Korban Pesach every year, but this Korban Pesach was connected to the tshuva of Am Yisrael. And it looked like a wonderful, wonderful thing that Klal Yisrael was coming together. Remember, the Korban Pesach itself is a ceremony that is connected with the repudiation of Avodah Zarah. Why is that so? Because the lamb, was actually the god of Egypt. And when we shech the lamb, we're repudiating the Avodah Zarah. So you find throughout Tanakh that when Klal Yisrael does tshuva against Avodah Zarah, often it is followed by a description of the Korban Pesach, which is the repudiation of Avodah Zarah, coming together. So we have, again, the finding of the Sefer Torah, the fact that it's open to the Teichacha, the fact that Yoshiyahu cries and sobs and understands that this is the last chance to bring Klal Yisrael together. And he sends people all over the place to be Makarev and to destroy Avodah Zarah. And the pasuk indicates, B'pashtus, although we'll see, he was Matzliach. He was Oker Avodah Zarah from Eretz Yisrael. And even though we say, keep in mind, even though Chazal always say, there were three major Averas that caused the Churban Bayis Rishon. Avodah Zarah, Gilui Araya, Shvichus Damim. But it's also clear in ways that maybe we don't fully understand that they all came from Avodah Zarah. That when you got rid of Avodah Zarah, you got rid of the other things too. The other things came from the strong connection that people had to Avodah Zarah. And therefore the celebration of that Pesach was a repudiation. So it wasn't just the Korban Pesach, it was the repudiation of Avodah Zarah. And it seemed at that particular time that Baruch Hashem, there was great, great, great Hatzlacha in bringing the Jewish people back to Hashem. Yeah.
These Jewish communities that were so invested in Avodah Zarah, what would it look like for someone seeing these communities? Is it that they all abandoned Yiddishkeit, or was it that there was some yeshivas on the side, people doing Avodah Zarah? What would it look like?
Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. Victor Miller has a whole approach. Once again, when you read the book of Malachim, you read Shoftim, Malachim, it seems to me like everybody was doing Avodah Zarah. Like everybody was doing it. Rabbi Miller claims, he has some sources for it, that in fact it was never more than a small minority of people. Meaning, if you would have walked in, most people were keeping the Torah, most people were keeping the mitzvahs. which is also why it's implausible there were no Sefer Torah, right? But the point was that because there were minorities that were doing it, and the other people did not protest so much, and they didn't try to change it, so Hashem considers them all to be idol worshippers, even though Alibid the Emes, they were not. So again, I can't be machriya on this. I'll just say, once again, if you read the psukim, you get the impression, like everybody. He actually says it was only a minority at any one time. How much of a minority? That would depend on the place. There probably were cities that were more connected to Avodah Zarah than not. We certainly know the kings, Manasseh, until he did Shuvah, was very connected, but that didn't automatically peter down to everybody. Yeah.
How would we get the idea that Kol Yisrael Ravens Elazar?
Well, that's not where we get the idea, but this is an expression of, indeed, Kol Yisrael Ravens Elazar, that if there are people that are over the Avodah Zarah, it's my responsibility too, because I could have worked harder to stop it and the like. So far, so good. And indeed, people thought, and the Nevi'im thought, Yirmiyahu himself thought it was already a Navi. Yirmiyahu's Nevuos, by the way, Yirmiyahu's career is essentially the reign of Yoshiyahu. So it's interesting, obviously, Yirmiyahu must have had a very close relationship with Yoshiyahu, because Yirmiyahu's father was Yoshiyahu's Rebbe. Right? And indeed, you'll see, Yirmiyahu's Nevuos are during the reign of Yoshiyahu and the kings that come afterwards. After Yoshiyahu, it's a rapid decline. Yoshiyahu was the last great hope to avert the Churban by bringing the Jewish people to tshuva. After he died, and I'll discuss how he died, everything went downhill. Okay. So far, so good, though. Yoshiyahu brings people to tshuva. But the Gemara actually explains things were not as good as they looked. There was hypocrisy. He was fooled. His officials got fooled. The Gemara gives an example that people would paint idols, pictures of idols, on the backs of their doors, and they would worship the idols. Yoshiyahu's men did a house-to-house search for Avodah Zarah, and they'd open the door, go through the house. There were no idols, because the idol is on the back of the door. Then when they closed the door, people went back to worshiping Avodah Zarah. Again, this may be literal or not literal, but the point basically was that there was hypocrisy, meaning people acted as if they did tshuva. The tshuva was not sincere. Whether it's minority, majority, that's the other question. Okay, so now we have the following story. And by the way, this is one of the keynotes on Tisha B'Av. You may hear me repeat a lot of this on Tisha B'Av. So I'm asking your apologies ahead of time, because you already will have heard it by the time I talk about it. And that is Parei Melech Mitzrayim. Right? Mitzrayim is what? Southwest of Eretz Yisrael, right? Egypt, southwest. Parei Melech Mitzrayim wants to wage war against Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, who so far has not conquered Eretz Yisrael. Right? Mitzrayim wants to wage war against Babylonia. Babylonia is Iraq. Right? Iran is Persia. Iraq is Babylonia, Babel. Paro wants to assemble an army and go northeast to wage war against Nebuchadnezzar. He diplomatically requests, just like today, countries have to do this, a rite of passage. Today we would talk about flyover rights, whatever. He says he wants to take his army through Eretz Yisrael in order to wage war against Nebuchadnezzar. This is not hostilities against Eretz Yisrael. This is, I want to go through your land so I could wage war against Nebuchadnezzar. Babylonia, Egypt. Yoshiyahu refuses the request. And this is the following. Yoshiyahu says, Baruch Hashem, I have brought the Jewish people to tshuva. We are no longer vulnerable based on the curses of the Teichacha. And instead, we are zoche to the blessings. Right before the curses are the blessings. And one of the blessings is, if you keep my mitzvos, cherev lo sa'avor bi'artzachem. No invading sword, army, shall pass through your land. And Yoshiyahu understood, and Chazal understand it as well, that this doesn't only mean an invading army that wants to fight against you, but even an army that wants to fight against somebody else. They will not go through your land. That's called cherev shel shalom, a sword of an enemy, of a foreign force that is not coming to wage war against you. But they too will not be able to go to your land. Yoshiyahu felt, we are worthy of that bracha. So he told Parai, no. Yirmiyahu HaNavi told Yoshiyahu, because he knew the truth, that Klal Yisrael is not yet on that madrega. Some people did tshuva, many people didn't. He told Yoshiyahu, let Parai go through your land. Yoshiyahu was not makabel, the words of the Navi. Yoshiyahu thought he knew better. So as a result, he told Paro no. Now Paro was being polite in asking, because Paro was going to do what he wanted anyway. He figured he would ask. Yoshiyahu said no, so Paro takes his army, and it made it much worse. At this point, not only is he determined to go fight Nebuchadnezzar, but he's also going to fight Yoshiyahu if Yoshiyahu tries to stop him. Yoshiyahu assembled a big army to stop Paro, and there was a great milchama in the area called Megiddo. Megiddo is the middle of the country. And Yoshiyahu, for reasons that are a little obscure militarily, Yoshiyahu was in that milchama himself. And in that milchama against Parai, to stop Paro from going to Bavel, Yoshiyahu HaMelech was killed. He was killed. It says he was pierced with 300 arrows. His body was like a sieve, blood coming out 300 places. And as he was dying, and he was murmuring something, he was saying something. So it mentions the Leitzonei Hador, the scoffers, thought he would finally say, oh, no, there's no God, there's no justice. I was such a tzaddik, I brought people to tshuva and God rejected me. They were hoping to hear in his last words, words of kfira, words of heresy, words of apikorsis. But instead, he was declaring, tzaddik hu Hashem. Hashem is righteous. Ki marisi, ki piu marisi. I have rebelled against his words. I did not listen to the prophets. Yoshiyahu died. Now, this was a massive, massive, massive tragedy for Klal Yisrael. Not only because a righteous king died, but because Yirmiyahu HaNavi understood that this was it. Because looking at the following kings, as we'll see tomorrow, that was it. There was no one who would have the chance to bring Am Yisrael to tshuva. Now, here is how significant his death was. Eicha, which are the lamentations of Yirmiyahu HaNavi about the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Eicha has 5 chapters. Each chapter, well, the first 4 chapters, chapter Perek Aleph, Perek Beis, Perek Dalet are Aleph Beis acrostics. Perek Gimel is a triple Aleph Beis acrostic. Perek Hey is the only Perek, although it has 22 psukim, but it's not Aleph Beis. So Perek Dalet begins, Eicha Yuam Zahav. How has the gold become dimmed? Yishna Kesem Ophir, the finest gold has become dark. Chazal understands this was not something Yirmiyahu wrote about the Churban Beis HaMikdash. This was the hesped he wrote for the death of Yoshiyahu HaMelech. And when the Churban happened 22 years later, Yoshiyahu died, we'll see, 22 years before the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And Yirmiyahu wrote all of the lamentations about the Churban Beis HaMikdash. He included in the lamentations the hesped over Yoshiyahu HaMelech, because he understood that the death of Yoshiyahu put the nail in the coffin. And therefore that is part and parcel over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So when you look at Perek Dalet of Eicha, remember, it is not about the Beis HaMikdash. It is actually about the death of Yoshiyahu HaMelech. And as I indicated, there is a kina on Tisha B'Av that talks about Yoshiyahu HaMelech. Okay? So we have 22 years left. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And we're going to see that essentially it's downhill slide. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, if Yoshiyahu was such a tzaddik, so why didn't he listen to the Navi?
Well, I mean, you're gonna have this question a gazillion times. I mean, I can't answer those questions. I mean, sometimes a person is so confident in their assessment of a situation that they make misjudgments. I mean, this is throughout Tanakh. Yoshiyahu's kavanah was l'shem shamayim. He was batuach that he brought the Jewish people to tshuva. How could he not listen to a Navi? It's a good question, but sometimes a person is so convinced that these mistakes happen. Yeah.
What was Yirmiyahu's role in the Milchama?
Yirmiyahu just told him not to go. That's all.
What does he normally do when they go to the war? Does he take over the city like as a king? Or?
No. Yirmiyahu is a Navi. He's not a king. Now, why Yoshiyahu thought it was so important to go to war is very, very difficult. Let me just remind you, in the book of Shmuel, it actually says that David HaMelech used to go out in war with his soldiers, and Yoav, his own general, said, no, you cannot go out to war because you're the king, and we can't afford to lose the king, and the like. Which means the normal practice was the king did not go out to war because the king would be the obvious target. But maybe this is an example of Yoshiyahu's overconfidence. In other words, Yoshiyahu was so batuach that they have the guarantee of cherev leisavar be'artzachem that he felt he wasn't even putting himself. I mean, this is an example. He was not even putting himself in sakana to put himself in that situation. So really, the chait was, number one, not listening to the Navi, and number two, the overconfidence that you're invulnerable because you think you brought everybody to tshuva. Yeah.
Was it when Moshe was appointing a new leader, before he appointed Joshua for his passing, wasn't one of the conditions for the new leader that they should lead the Jewish nation into battle? Or was that specifically in regarding to Amon?
No, that was Yehoshua, but the custom of the Malachim was not, because you see, I mean, David initially did it too, but David was told not to lead people in battle, and from then on, it was not. Well, it's hard to say because there are other. The normal practice seems to be the king did not go into war. On the other hand, there are exceptions. This is not the only exception, so you have to analyze the particular exception. Here, I think we do have an understanding that it was Yoshiyahu was batuach, that he was on the madrega, that God's promise in the Tochacha would be fulfilled, and therefore he felt there was nothing wrong with him going out. Okay, so this is Yoshiyahu. We have 4 more kings in the span of 22 years. They are either the sons or the grandsons of Yoshiyahu, and we're going to see that the book of Malachim treats it like in one parak, like you're really, everything is bad from this point onwards. There is no longer a glimmer of hope, which is why, once again, Yirmiyahu included the hesped over Yoshiyahu in the lamentations over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Okay, see you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.